that all your strip sets are arranged and put together in the proper order, it's time to start sewing them together. I did decide to starch all of my fabrics because of the woven gingham. It only took me maybe 10 or 12 minutes to do it, so all of my fabrics have been starched and they're in their sets, and I'm going to start sewing them together now. We're going to start with set A, which is fabrics 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So here I have my first set, my set A, fabrics 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm going to begin sewing them together. I'm going to take the first two fabrics, number 1 and 2, and I'm going to get ready to sew them together. I am going to offset these. The reason we offset them is so that you can get more strips, or more strips of diamonds, I should say, out of the fabric itself. So we're going to offset. So fabric number 1 is going to be left there, and the second fabric, you're going to sew right sides together. The second fabric needs to be offset by about 2 1/4 inches. You can eyeball it, or you can just kind of get out a ruler, whatever way you want to do it. I don't worry too much about selvage, just about making sure that it's about the same. So about 2 3/4 inches. So this is where my next fabric's going to go. The trick and the most important part about sewing these strips together is, of course, a consistent 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you're not sure about the seam allowance on your machine, find a piece of graph paper or something that you know is an exact 1/4 inch. Put it on your machine and see where the edge of your fabric needs to be in order to get a consistent 1/4 inch. And we're going to sew the full length of this fabric together, keeping the edges lined up, being careful not to tug or pull. Be really gentle with them, again, because we don't want to have any bowing or stretching of our fabrics. You're going to sew the entire length of the fabric. Just keep an eye on when you get to the end of the fabric number 1 underneath. You just are going to want to end your seam there. And there you have it. You have your first 2 fabrics now sewn together. They're going to need to be pressed. I prefer to press mine one set at a time so that it's just less bulk with the iron. So I will quickly demonstrate how I'm going to press these fabrics for you. To press your fabrics for this step, I carefully set the seam and then open it, being very gentle. And again, remember to press up and down, not going side to side. Just make sure that you've got the seam open and just go up and down. I'm going to do that going the full length. And then you're going to want to have your seams pressed open. This will make it a lot easier later. So you're going to want to kind of separate them. And this one is when it's really tempting to get your iron and start kind of weaving it along to do that. If you really want something to help guide, I have this Hera marker. It can be useful to help hold the seam open. I sometimes will use the tip of my iron but not set it down until it's further on. But the key is to be very gentle with your fabrics and opening that seam. And once you've done that for the full length, you're going to take strip number 3, offset it in the same way. You can probably just eyeball it mostly. And so again, so continue doing that until you have all 4 strips sewn together. All right, once all of your strip sets are sewn together, you should have 4 sets of strips that have 4 pieces of fabric in each. Here's my strip set A with fabric 1, 2, 3, and 4. Here's my set B, which is fabrics 2, 3, 4, and 5. I've got my strip set C, which is 3, 4, 5, and 6, and finally I've got D, which is 4, 5, 6, and 7. You will see on all of them that on all of them I've got my seams carefully pressed open and everything is straight and neat and ready to go. So the next step is to cut these strip sets into diamond strips on a 45-degree angle. So for this step, you're going to need your rotary cutter and a ruler, and a couple of rulers if possible, and a cutting mat. The next exciting step is to create strips of diamonds from these long strip sets. So there are a few really important things to do. First is to make sure that you have your fabric lined up totally straight. You want to make sure it's straight, and if you've done a careful job with your pressing and your sewing, It should lie just straight right along the lines of your cutting mat, and you shouldn't have any problems with it starting to bow or arch or fight you in certain directions. And then the first step is to make a 45-degree cut. Basically, you need to cut at a 45-degree angle, and the thing you want to make sure of is that you are just missing the ends of the selvage here. You want to make sure that your seam comes past where you're about to cut to get your first 45-degree edge. So I'm going to miss my selvage and all my seams are in order. So I'm going to make my first cut very carefully along this line. These scraps you can just discard. Now the next trick is that anytime you are making a lone star and you're doing it with a strip piecing, the width of this cut needs to be the same width as the fabric that you originally cut to make your strips. So we are going to make our strips as wide as they were when we first did it. So the same width of this fabric is the cut that I need to do here. The trick is, if you just measure along your cutting mat, for instance, say I'm looking for 3 inches, and if I measure 1, 2, 3 inches just along the edge of the cutting mat and I try cutting on that line, you can see that I'm not going to have diamonds that are going to work for my star. This cutting method, or when you're using a 45-degree diamond, it's not about the length of the side. It's about the width between the parallel sides. So we have a certain width here, and we need to have the exact same width going across the other direction. So what I like to do is I take another smaller ruler, lay it along the 45-degree angle right at that line that I want to do this at. See that? Right there at the 3-inch line for this particular project. Then I'm going to carefully butt the other cutting mat up against it. I'm going to move this just slightly, and I'm going to very carefully cut along that edge. And so now I have my first strip, my first diamond strip. And I need to cut 8 from each one of these, so I'm just going to continue across. Every time I'm going to carefully check to make sure it's still going straight. In a few minutes I'm going to have to move the fabric over, but I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up again very carefully this line here, because I want my diamonds to be straight and I want them to be symmetrical. I'm going to carefully cut, and I've got number 2. Now I'm going to move my strip set over. I'm going to be very careful again about making sure that everything is totally straight. This time I'm watching 3 lines. I'm watching this top line, and I'm also watching my 45-degree. I don't want to start getting wonky here. Same thing. I'm going to make sure that I've got everything lined up. Now that I've got some bias here, it's easy to let it start moving and twisting. So I'm going to be careful that I don't let that point down there do that. So I've got this lined up. Carefully bring the other ruler right next to it and cut. So I'm going to continue to do this until I have 8 pieces from each strip set. Once I've cut strip set A, then I'm going to do the same thing and repeat with B, C, and D until I have 8 diamond strips from every one of my color sets. So I'm finishing up now with cutting all of my diamond strips. This is my last strip, and I've got fabrics 4, 5, 6, and 7. I always prefer to keep the one at the beginning of the strip, like 1, 2, 3, or 4 down here in the bottom towards me, just because it helps me keep things straight in my head. That was cut number 7, and I'll do my last one here. And that's it. That's my final cut. So I can set that aside, and you can see now here are my strips. This is strip D, and I've got strip C here. You can see how the star is going to begin taking shape a little bit just by holding them up next to each other. It's really exciting. It's always a fun part in the project when you kind of get to start to see what that is going to look like. So there are all of my strips ready to go in diamonds, and I'm going to handle these as little as possible so that I don't start accidentally distorting or doing anything with the bias. So that's it for week 1. You've cut your strips of fabric, sewn them together, and cut them into strips of diamonds, and next week we will be starting with piecing them together to make a large diamond. I look forward to seeing your posts on social media. If you'd like to share them, please hashtag Lone Star Tree Skirt and hashtag Hopeful Homemaker. We'll be watching for them. I'm excited to see all your fabric combinations and everything you put together. And good luck, happy sewing, and we'll see you next Monday.